Hi there, and welcome to the Multiple Losses Grief Seminar. I would like to thank Cropo Funeral Chapel for making this possible. I'm Tiana, and I'm the Program Services Coordinator with Palliative Manitoba. Before we get started, I just want to quickly talk about some of Palliative Manitoba's current programs and services that we offer. We have our telephone bereavement program, where we match you with a trained volunteer and receive weekly support over the phone. We have our Kids Grieve and Teens Grieve 2 online support groups, and we also have our monthly bereavement message that lets you know about upcoming grief-related events. You can find more information about this on our website, www.palliativemanitoba.ca. And today we have Karen Toole presenting on multiple losses. Karen Toole is a retired spiritual care specialist. So I'm going to let you present.
Well, it's good to be with folks again, even this way, during this particular time of a lot of grieving going on for losses of freedom and connection and the human connection that we need. And the theme of this particular, as Tiana said, seminar is multiple losses. And I actually contacted Tiana and asked, does that mean simultaneous loss? And that tragedy does happen, or cumulative loss, and I think Tiana kind of said both and to some degree. So it's good though to clarify what we mean by multiple loss. One of the things that often happens for people is they experience a loss and think they've become in some ways now an expert on grief with their first loss. And it simply isn't like that. And maybe I should back up and say one of the reasons I particularly want to do this seminar is that I began as one of a family of 5. As older brother, older sister, myself, the baby of the family, and then my mom and dad. And now at my age, and I'm getting older, they're all gone. But there was cumulative loss in a short period of time. The brother, my sister, my mother, all within a 10-year segment. So it was quite a time. And then soon after that, my dad. So virtually I was an orphan by the time I was 31, with no siblings, even though I'd grown up in that kind of a family. So I bring the personal to it as well in many ways, but the professional side of it too, having worked in HSC, and having worked in ministry in the background in the United Church, there have been situations for me in ministry where there's been multiple loss simultaneously, where you get the phone call that there's been a terrible car accident, and of course in HSC there's multiple loss experience in any kind of tertiary care hospital. So the tragic loss reality is compounded layer after layer. We layer our lives with loss, and I want to say that in a very positive way, and I'll open that up more. You know, it sounds very depressing to say life is loss, but life is. As you get older, you lose your youth, you lose your childhood, but of course you gain along the way. But by the time you're in your 70s, you're starting to realize there's less years left ahead, and you're starting to count the people that you knew who are no longer alive. And you're starting, as many of the older people point out, the Saturday newspaper, and you younger people who are online maybe check it there, but it's sort of like, whoa, who died becomes the Saturday ritual. And it really is important to honor that. We're not morbid, we're not depressed, but we're looking at the reality of loss and what it means to be mortal. So, one of the things about multiple loss is the presumption that if several people die in succession, you know, how do you grieve each one of them individually? And one of the things I really want to point out is that every life lost is a unique universe lost. The Jewish tradition teaches that we are all a universe. So if you lose 2 children and a parent in a house fire, you've lost 3 worlds, 3 different universes that are there. So there's unique messages from each one of them. And one of the things to do is to honor that in your loss. It feels overwhelming. I think one of the things that sets multiple loss apart too, of course, is the feelings, the psychological effect of multiple loss is, like, what did I ever do to deserve this? Grief is a very self-focused emotion. And I would say it in the best word that I can use, selfish. It is all about you. When I lost my brother when I was 15, I lost my big brother. He was 11 years older than me. When I lost my sister at 18, I lost my older sister, but I had no clue my parents had lost 2 of their 3 children. Now you'd think by the time I was 18, I begin to have a little awareness of that. I didn't ask my parents, and particularly my mother, how she survived that until I was in my early 20s. And that's not because I'm insensitive. It is because it's the relationship you have with an individual that you're mourning, that you're struggling to find a reconnect to, and asking, what do I do now? So, and one of the things that comes with multiple loss that I really want to stress is a feeling that somehow you're the survivor. Okay, why me? And that's survivor's guilt. Lots written on it. You can Google it, look it up. But if you're in a car accident and you're the only person who walks away, why you? There are movies made of this. There's a movie made, I can't remember the title now, but it's of a plane crash where one person survives. And what does it do to the rest of their life? And if you walk away from a multiple loss, tragic situation, that's really pronounced, the guilt. Survivor complex, and it goes into some strange behaviors. For me, as one of 3 children, for the longest time, I walked around with the feeling of, what am I supposed to do with my life now? Is this something that I'm supposed to change the world about? And you might say, well, yeah, I did. I'm sitting here with you guys. I'm working in the palliative stream and the grief and loss stream. And yes, definitely, it's connected. It really is connected. But it also gives you a sense of unsafety in your life and a sense of you might be the curse factor. This is part of survivor guilt too. I remember when I first started to date after my sister died and I was starting to date, I would warn potential boyfriend that I was not good news. Now that would scare them off. And the reality was, I was really feeling that. Like, as a survivor of 3, maybe I was the curse somehow. It's not a rational feeling, but it's pervasive, trying to make sense of the senseless that we do. And how do I go on from that? And you're very wary of life for a while. It's like the movie, just when you thought, in Jaws, the movie Jaws, just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water. Well, again, if you lost a child and then shortly after that you lose your husband, how quick are you going to go into the water of life again? Just when I thought it was safe. So, and yet, is it? Can I take this risk? So you become hyper-vigilant about your own life to some degree. I don't know how both my siblings were killed in car accidents, so I don't know how my mother ever watched me get into a car or get a driver's license, but she didn't. And that's surviving the multiple loss and not grasping and holding on to me, which she didn't do, which is quite amazing. So you do feel you're the common factor of the curse. Am I the bad news? Do I have a dark cloud over my head? That person was my husband, that person was my daughter, why am I here? Why didn't I die first, even if it's multiple sequential loss? So that's a part of the psychological struggle as well. And all of those different kind of psychological stages can have a different effect on us. You don't trust life very well when you've gone through multiple loss, because you never know when lightning's going to strike again. And it can strike in the same place twice. That's what you know now. Like, what family deserves to lose people in car accidents 3 years apart? So you now know it's not just once that you're going to go through this. It can be over and over again. And so it's very hard to trust life. And like say, there's the survival guilt. How come it wasn't me? And I don't know how many of you have ever seen the movie Stand By Me, but it's actually a Stephen King story turned into a movie. And it's about 4 guys who bond, and they're going looking for a body that is lost out there. But one of the stories in there is a boy who's lost his older brother in the Vietnam War. And he's standing at the graveside, and his brother was a hero, and he's a loser. And this is the other thing. Why wasn't it me? I wasn't as good as the one who died. And that can cause another issue for people. Like, mothers in particular, take me, not my children. You know, and that kind of, like, if there's a plan, this is a terrible plan. I would have jumped in front of the car. Why couldn't I have done that? So there's, in the movie Stand By Me, they're standing at the hero's graveside, and he hears the father say, whether the father says this or not, looking straight at him, the younger brother, it should have been you. And that's the feeling of the survivor sometimes. I'm not as good as the person who died. It should have been me. And I remember once overhearing my dad when somebody was giving him sympathy. And again, you can't hold on to these hurts that come in and around multiple losses. People, you know, you could write a book on what people shouldn't say, of course. But my dad, somebody was saying, it's got to be terrible to go on from that. He said, yeah, I've lost all my children. And I was right there. Now, where does that come from? Where does that come from in my dad? I don't blame him. For a while I did, by the way. I was only a teenager myself. I don't blame him, because the children that mattered were the dead ones now. I was still there. So there wasn't a lot of focus on the living. The dead had taken the place of the living in the importance of learning to love and what love is. It was easier for my dad to love the dead siblings than me, the difficult one who was grieving too. So we learn this along the way, that there's many, many factors involved with multiple loss. As I said, from age 15 to 30, I had 4 significant people die in my life, and then at 30 my dad died. So, like I say, there was brother, sister, mother, dad in that 15-year period. So one of the things I really want to say out of all of this is you don't get better at grief. You know, oh, I'm a pro now. I've lost 4 people. Let me tell you about grief and how it works. You don't become a grieving professional. What you learn to do with each death gradually is that every one of them is utterly and completely different. Just as you love them, you grieve them differently. So the grief for my brother wasn't the grief for my dad, and the grief for my sister wasn't the grief for my mom. So, and I remember thinking when my mom died, oh, I'm so good at this now. Well, I wasn't good at it. You don't become a professional at grieving. I also know now, having lived for many years, that I'm not especially cursed, nor am I blessed or lucky to have survived. It is random. The reality of our mortality is random. Yes, there are factors sometimes that lead to our own demise, but the reality is most of our dying is the accidents, my mother's stroke, all of these things, they're random. They're random. Might have been prevented, maybe, if something. But that's the what if that we go into in grief. It's one of the stages of grief. The if only, the what if, the denial of death. So, and one of the things I've become clear of over the years is, I made reference to it before, but I'll dig a little deeper into it now, is I did not get called to work in palliative care or healing or the ministry because it was planned that way by some supreme power that I would lose all 4 people before I was 30, and then I would become an especially gifted person at this. If I thought that for a minute, I would never have done what I've done. Now that factors in, but it wasn't planned that way. And if you ask me right now, okay, you can have them all back, but you can't have the career you have, I'd take them all back in a moment. But it becomes the question of what do you do with what you live? And that grief is part of our living. And we've got to hold on to that. Grief is about dying, but it's part of our living. We learn to live with grief because grief is love. That's what it is. You don't grieve what you don't love. You can't. So you have to have that profound connection, and it opens up the meaning of love. The journey of each unique loss is really vital for us to hold on to, because it's like every life is a present, and you need to open that gift. You need to open that gift. And one of the things I brought was a little bit of a show and tell for the video, because I don't have you all in the room. But you know that old saying, you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. And it is an old saying. Watch out, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Truth is, if you're a family, if you have a community, all your eggs are in one basket. They really are. That's what holds you together. You're in this together. So there's my family. And one of the things I know about my family, you don't know. And you will never know because they're all dead. So you're never going to meet them. Ever. Except through me. And some photographs that are left. So there was my sister, who was always a bit showy in many ways, and her name was Darlene. And then there was my dad, who was a working guy, pretty tough and pretty strong. And there was my brother, who had his own unique strength, much more gentle in his strength, I think. And then there was my mom, who was a homemaker and a mother. And we were all in one basket. And then there was me, because I was the surprise kid at the end. So what happens in grief with this is we're all in one basket. And all of a sudden, one by one, they disappear. First my brother, out of the basket. So now who are we? Now who are we? One egg's gone, broken, smashed, gone. Then my sister. And now who are we? Did my parents ever intend an only... Whoop, I fell on the floor. Did my parents ever intend an only child? Never. So everything changes in our family structure. And then my mom, suddenly, with a stroke, not more than 5 years after my sister. And the parent I never wanted to be left with, he's still in the basket with me. So eventually, I have to learn now to relate to him in a different way. Changes everything we predicted about our lives. You can't predict. So eventually my dad is gone. And you could say, oh, that's awful. You're the one left with the basket. But my life's been going on too in this time. And I choose to take the risk of marriage at this time. So I'm not totally alone. But the one thing I know about all of this that I've come to realize out of this life in the basket is that little kid got stronger and stronger and stronger through it all. And at some points, it felt like I was going to break. But the reality is, I am in that basket, and now I have 2 sons, and they're married, and I won't do the egg thing all over again. 2 sons, they're married, I have 1 grandchild. I think, in many ways, grief cost my marriage to some degree. It was a struggle for my partner to figure out where I was at times. Complex people are hard to love. But all of that you have to own for yourself. You have to own it and say, what am I going to do with this? What am I going to do with this basket? I'm going to toss the basket out, or am I going to begin to hold on to my roots and basket again, give life again, and start all over with living? So we all go through this. It's not just my story. So I once was a speaker at hospice in palliative care way back in the dark ages when it was just getting going and holding the large conferences. And I was talking about spirituality. I'm sitting down in the coffee shop, and I'll share this very quick story with you. Sitting down in the coffee shop, and I was the spiritual component of this. There was body, mind, and soul, so I was the soul. And I'm sitting down, and I was the public speaker, and people kept coming in. That's because I had a column in the newspaper at that time, too, so they were all curious. But they kept coming in, and I had a really smart opening to the address, and I was falling apart. And when the staff person from palliative care came and said, the room is full, we were so excited, I was going, I hope there's a back door. That's how nervous I was about what could I contribute to 800 people at that hotel, looking for something about the soul of grief and what it means to go through this. And I thought, I have never felt so alone in my life. And this is what I want to share with you. I realized at that moment, I'm not alone. I am not alone at all. The names of those people who are no longer living are part of the courage that got me here. Would I prefer they lived? Yes. Would I prefer they were sitting in the coffee shop with me? Yes. But they were. So when I opened the address, what I said is, I want to introduce you to the people who brought me here. So I just turned and said, this is my brother Trevor, this is my sister Darlene, this is my mother Agnes, and this is my father William. Of course they weren't there. I wasn't in my right mind, but I was in my right heart. And that's the key about grief. It's going to bruise and batter your heart. It's going to push you from one side to the other. And it is a storm, but out of the storm rises an inner calm, such as you've never known before, and it can come. You think you're going to break. This is the final straw that will break my back. So, one of the things I'd warn you about is don't fall into the fact of anybody who tells you there was a plan in this. The only plan that will come out of multiple losses is what you plan to do with it. What you plan to do. No one is planning it for you. You can come very close to quitting because of the loneliness, but the key to healing is to listen deeply to the messages that your circle of love has given you in one way or another. By the way, they weren't saints, but we're all saints in that sense. I don't mean saints like out of a book. I mean living saints, the ones who try to do their best. So the key is to listen deeply to those inner messages. They're still there. They were part of your life, and they're living messages there. And then to live gently. And that's very easy to say, but to live gently is not easy. Be gentle with yourself. We are the hardest on ourselves. This is when we usually add to our grief by adding pain, and we don't have to do it. It's not necessary. So I really believe there are no experts. I have 2, 3, 4 shelves of books on grief, and I've read them with my seeking. By the way, this is a hidden question mark. With my seeking, which is my sacred symbol, the seeking of that. So Tiana, I'll come up for air. Anything you want to say or question?
Any questions?
How's our time?
I'm just thinking of our participants that normally come, and an individual lost people 2 months apart, and they find that they weren't grieving for the first death as much as they were for the second one. Did you find that?
Every grief is different.
Yeah.
Every grief is different because every relationship is different. So my brother was my hero. My sister was my sibling. Sibling quarrels, rivalry, fights, see who wins. I never fought with my brother. He was my hero. So the grief was different. The grief was very different. And it wasn't like one grief was real and the other one was unreal, or one grief was good and the other grief was bad. It's different relationships. I miss my sister, who I didn't have enough years to fight with. I don't know who would be now. I miss my hero brother, who'd be 83 and might need my care now. You know? So yeah, it's like grief is a very different experience each time, and it was a shock to me to find that out as time went on. And I guess we're not talking about anticipatory grief in this, but one of the realities is that I really believe there is such a thing as anticipatory grief, but there's no grief until there's death. And that's the other reality we have. Like, I was watching my mom diminish to some degree, and something was wrong. And then she was taking medication for her blood pressure and all of that. And I was thinking, oh, she can't die, she can't die, she can't die. I was anticipating her death, but I didn't grieve until she died and really move into that. So, I don't know if that helps, Tiana.
I think so.
In answering. I think you really have to respect the relationship when you grieve. That you can't, you know, we speak well of the dead, but in life, it's not all well all the time. The real life is this, it's a roller coaster. So, and to respect and honor the dead, we try not to talk about the downswing. We try to keep it on the upswing. But in grieving, you don't. In grieving, you're dealing with the ups and the downs, ups and the downs. I love him, I hate him, I love him, I hate him. And you can hate them for dying, which I have with my brother and sister. I have stood at the graveside of my mother and said, thanks to the two of them. I hated them for dying first. There's a lot of pain in grief. And I did the same thing when my dad died. Great, here we go again. And where are you guys? You were supposed to be standing here side by side with me. So, and I don't think that's a failure in my loving. That's me loving them still. I would have been angry if they lived 2,000 miles away and didn't take the trip. You know, COVID or no COVID, you know, but COVID would prevent them. That'd be a good excuse. But the reality is, if they hadn't taken the trip, and they weren't there, and it opens the door to grief again, you see. So you don't do grief and get it over with. You learn to live with grief. It companions you all your life, and it will teach you the meaning of love. It'll teach you over and over again how to love. And that's our journey. So any other questions, Tiana? I've got a couple more things to say before I leave.
Another participant, let's say they lost someone 30 years ago, and now they just lost another person. It's bringing up that past grief, too. Oh,
yeah. Every time you grieve all. That's a good thing to ask, because I have it written on the sheet here. Every time you grieve all your losses. All of them. You don't grieve. I mean, every time I've experienced grief since my brother, which was my first real experience of grief, of intimate loss, I grieve all of them at every intimate loss. Well, I guess I'll just say that I'm going to do an internment for my cousin tomorrow. And he was like a little brother. And I cannot grieve him separately. Like, he's part of the nest. He's part of the family. And so I'm thinking of the other cousin who died, and now I've actually moved into my cousin's place. I'm the youngest, if you can believe that, among the cousins. But that opens the door to the ones who went ahead of us. So their names are right there right now. So you can't say, well, I grieved Charlie and now I'll grieve Elizabeth. You will grieve Charlie and Elizabeth and everybody in between. Because it's grief. The commonality is connection. The nest we share, the relationships we have, the love we build. That's what it's about. So, yeah, great question. It would have been a shame not to put that in for folk. So I could do a couple more things, but go ahead.
My thought disappeared. I'll let you keep going and I'll come back.
Okay. Well, one of the, I guess if I leave any message, is that it's, and people, I don't want people to take this wrong, but when I said about the other eggs, like I know them. They're on the floor here right now. I can put them back in my nest because I'm always there with them, by the way. Always. These people are dead, long time dead. Mortality is a reality. But the reality is they're not dead to me at all. They're part of my story. I mean, as I put my hand on that basket, I can feel the connection of being part of that family. And that's when we get into the spiritual. I mean, these are symbols, but the spiritual is, do you want to sever the connection to the people you loved? Is that how you're going to grieve? I'm just going to get over it, those phrases that other people use, or I'm just never going to think about that person again. Can't be done. Can't be done. You will think of them, even if you try not to. So I think everybody lives, even the tiniest baby who draws only 2 breaths lives with a purpose in life. And when I think of my brother and sister whose lives were really cut short, I mean, yeah, I grieve the life they didn't have, the future they couldn't have, because their mortal bodies were gone. I also grieve the love they gave me, often, in their own unique ways. So what I chose to do at some point in my journey in working it all through, and this is where I would say to the participants, we're always working it through, and you'll keep working it through. But what I chose to do deliberately is to live to their love, not to their deaths. I could mourn them forever or celebrate them forever. And I will choose to celebrate them as part of my family until I have to leave. And then I hope my sons have some sense of I wasn't an only child. I didn't pop out of nowhere. I hope they'll have some sense of the stories of these people. That's how it got to be me. And that's a wonderful thing to honor. So the reality for me is when I made that decision to live to their love and not die to their deaths, it's not like that day I never got depressed or sad again or anything like that, but I turned a corner to say, cherish life. It's all too short. Cherish life. It's short if it's 103 years. It's short if it's 3 months. So cherish the moments of life that we have. And I know I got that from this, working on this. And as I remind you again, if I could have chosen another life where that wasn't there, I think I would have done it. But I couldn't choose. This is life. It's accidental, a lot of it. And we have to live with the accident scenes and make sense of those as scenes of something of beauty, not just horror or loss. So, it's wise. I think it's wisdom that comes out of all of this, and it's wise to hold on to life and to not die to their deaths. But life is always intertwined with death, and death in and of itself can be a gift to us. So, I could say a lot of things about, I have some other toys here. Maybe I'll finish with this other toys. They're not toys, but they're symbols. Where to go? Oh, here you are. One of the things is when you meet people, what you meet is the outside of a person. And I looked for my geode, but a geode is a rock that it's haphazard, that you pick it and you crack it and you see the beauty inside, the crystal. This is sort of like a slab of a geode, a big geode. So when I meet you, Tiana, I meet this, unless we spend a lot of time getting to know each other, or you're in my family and I have quality time with you and stuff. But I know that inside you is this. It takes a lot of time to appreciate this inside people. Mostly we bump up against each other's shells, each other's protective coverings, because we have to. I mean, if I took time to do this with every individual, I'd never get on with meeting anybody fully. But one of my favorite quotes from a theologian is Martin Buber, the Jewish theologian, who said, all real life is meeting. This is meeting. This is bumping. Mm-hmm. We bump, we bump, we bump. But once in a while we meet. And that's beautiful. And that's a guy who lives through the Holocaust. All real life is meeting. So the other symbol I like to use is I'm this. I am this. You're going to see the tree. But inside me, these are the rings of life. Right now somebody's doing my genealogy, which is fascinating. But it goes back centuries. The will to live, to persist, to go on. And they all died, but that makes me the tree. So you'll meet my tree of life. But it will take a little bit for you to realize what makes a tree in me. So they're just two symbols I hold on to always of what it means. I can be more practical for you about the steps in all of this. One of the things is to grieve fully. Don't let anybody cut your grief off. Lots of people want you to put it away too soon. Mm-hmm. Get, that famous get over it phrase. The other is to go back to nature, immerse yourself into the cosmos and creation and cycles of life and the seasons and all of that, because it has so much to teach you. Tell others till they're sick of hearing your story and want you to go away. That's okay. You'll find some others who want to hear your story. There's so many practical things. Don't take on too much after any form of loss, and don't say, well, now I'm an expert in the field because I've lost two people. And don't share your experience as the only experience. The reality is you have an experience to share, and it will open the door to others' experiences when you do that. And I think those are, one of the things I had to learn was to, and this was the hardest part of it in the steps of grieving, to be gentle with myself, to be good with myself. I wanted to take the blame. And I often would say to my mother, Darlene was more attractive. Trevor was your only son. And what am I? The accident that came third. But it was my mother who said to me, ultimately, you are the best accident that ever happened to us, before she died. And I consider that a gift of grief, yes. Because she could say that to me, her living one, at this point. So these are the things, there are practical steps. Sometimes you might dig into old friendships who knew your brother, or who knew people you knew. And it's good to renew those old friendships and acquaintances, and grief will push you to that, to clean those strings again, those family ties. You might even realize, like my cousins did, that at the death of the last aunt, we didn't want to meet at any more funerals. We were going to, but now we were going to meet in between the funerals, and we have. So these are the opportunities that come out of it. You might say, not when I'm experiencing the acute pain and grief. I don't see any opportunity, but it'll take time to show its face. And it usually pushes you to do things you wouldn't normally do, to clean up things. For example, me now, I thought I had my end-of-life medical things in place, but I'm really crossing all the T's and dotting the I's now, having watched what my last cousin went through. You know, and all of this is part of the wholeness and beauty of our lives. It's not just misery, it's miracle that we experience. So maybe that's a good note to end on, more than anything else, that out of that kind of what we think is acute pain comes the awesome revelations of our journey. So thanks, Tiana, for the privilege again, and thank all of you if you're watching this and can't be sitting in all real life meeting. Rub elbows with somebody. Okay, thanks, folks.
Thank you, Karen, for presenting and sharing your story. And again, thank you to Cropo for letting this happen.